Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Daily Memphians Tigers podcast. I'm the basketball beat writer, Stephen Johnson, joined by my guy, Frank Bonner. Another big week in sports here in Memphis. On Saturday, fans, y'all should have a busy day. We got the Tigers football game against East Carolina. That's at 11 a.m. In the evening at 6, the Tigers basketball team, ranked 12th in the nation, they have their second game against North Carolina Central at the FedEx Forum. Tip-off is at 6 p.m. But before we get into that, don't forget to check out some of our other podcasts. Jennifer Biggs hosts Sound Bites, Eric Barnes hosts The Sidebar, and Chris Harrington and Drew Hill, our guys, record the Grizzlies podcast every single week. You can find all of these in the Tigers podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, and of course, at thedailymemphian.com. So last week was a big week for the football team, I think. You could say the Mississippi State win was probably still the biggest of the season, but last week, the Tigers did, I think, really, I don't want to say save their season, but could have possibly maybe changed the outlook of it by upsetting SMU. SMU came into that game ranked. The Memphis defense really kind of showed out and knocked out the Mustangs again. It's kind of ironic 2 years ago, kind of a season-changing when it happened at the Liberty Bowl against SMU. And once again, they found themselves in that same predicament after knocking out the Mustangs again. So, Frank, just to recap, how did they slow down one of the best offenses in the nation?
Well, it started with that defensive line. I mean, SMU came into the game, one of the best in the country, only allowing 5 sacks the whole season, and that defensive line gets pressure on them and sacks the quarterback 5 times. They get it was 6 or 7 tackles for loss. So that defensive line really kind of set the tone for that defense and for the rest of the game.
Were you surprised at how much the pass rush has been able to get there? Memphis hasn't necessarily been known this season, I think, to be a great pass rushing team, but I got to say they dominated up front against SMU.
Yeah, man, I ain't gonna lie to you. I was I was real surprised. I mean, I know you mentioned the Mississippi State game in terms of that could be the biggest, but I think this was the most impressive win of the season. Even over that Mississippi State game because of the way that Memphis had been playing up until this point in terms of not necessarily getting a lot of pressure to the quarterback and so on. In this game, I mean, the defense played its best game of the season. And so I was real surprised at how well that defensive line was able to kind of disrupt that backfield in that way. This defense in the last 2 games has been able to play better against Navy, against UCF, and it kind of all came together against SMU, which is similar to what you saw last year at the end of the year. And so I'm curious to see if this defense can kind of keep that up. But I was, if you look at our last podcast, I didn't really think Memphis had much of a chance to beat SMU going into last week.
Yeah, I was kind of the similar thinking. But I know one reason that they, I think they were able to pull it off. They did get Seth Hennigan back. I don't know if he was necessarily 100%, but what was kind of your impression of how he looked in his first game back?
Well, I think, coming back from a shoulder injury and then you go into this game and throw it 53 times, I think he looked like he was pretty healthy coming off that shoulder injury. Now, Silverfield did say that he isn't 100%, but he's at a point where, putting him out there isn't going to be injured that shoulder anymore. And so if you feel enough to throw the ball 53 times, I think, he's pretty good to go. And I wouldn't expect that being any more of a reason to keep him out for the rest of the season after, looking at what he was able to do against SMU.
Well, Silverfield, I think at his core, he wants to be have a team that can dominate with the run game and things like that. Tigers only had about 85 yards last week. With the run game, have you been surprised at maybe the lack of effectiveness the last few weeks, or are you surprised that Silverfield would have, first game back, let them throw 53 times against the SMU defense?
Yeah, I am surprised. You have a head coach like Silverfield, who you said is all in on establishing the run game. They started the year pretty strong in the run game. It's not like they've necessarily went away from it or anything. It's just for whatever reason, they aren't getting the production that they want to have. And the coaching staff is still committed to trying to establish that. But if you look at these last two games, running back, I mean, I know with Parrish ran a number of times, but they didn't use the running backs at all against UCF. And then against SMU, 53 passes. I think it's a mixture of just not getting the production. And so when you're trying to win the game, you've got to go with what's working. And right now what's working is throwing the ball. And so I think, from a play calling standpoint, when you're just trying to win the game, if the running game's not working, you got to kind of ditch it, in that moment.
So turning the page, I think one reason that SMU win was so big that maybe at the beginning of the season, East Carolina might have been a game you would have assumed would have been a W for the Tigers, but they're 5-4. They're playing really good football. They've won 2 straight. They played UCF tough, lost by 4. They played Houston tough, lost by a touchdown. So this isn't a gimme for the Tigers coming up. I haven't checked the lines just yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if the bookies have this as maybe a pick 'em or Memphis as a small favorite. What stands out to you about East Carolina from what you've been kind of researching?
I know ESPN's got Memphis as a 5.5 favorite right now. I think the biggest thing you've got to be concerned with is this ECU defense in terms of their takeaways. I mean, they didn't have a takeaway against Temple last week, but that snapped a 16-game streak of the defense having at least one takeaway in a game. And then, Memphis offensively, they've had at least one turnover in the last 8 games. And so I think that's going to be the key. You don't want this ECU defense to kind of put the clamps on you and force you into some bad situations where you're turning the ball over and giving them more possessions, because they're also top 25 in the country in time of possession. And so I think all those factors kind of play into, if you're Memphis, you just got to protect the football.
So I think Memphis did a good job against the run last week, but I see ECU here has Keaton Mitchell is probably going to be 1,000-yard rusher. He's like at 900 right now. Got another guy approaching 500 yards. So seems like they're pretty well balanced. How's Memphis going to have to approach, trying to shut down that running game?
Well, I think if you're that defensive line, you're coming into this game with a lot of confidence right now. After what you were able to do against that SMU offense, I mean, you're coming into this week, thinking, why not? Why can't we do it again? And I think that's going to be the key. That those front big guys up front are going to have to get pressure in that backfield. And not only for the run, right? Also in the pass, you want to put pressure on the quarterback and kind of keep them on their toes in the run game and the passing game. But I think he's going to start with that defensive line to see if they can kind of repeat what they were able to do last week.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing here the quarterback, Holton Allers. I hope I didn't butcher his name. I apologize if I did. He's been sacked 26 times. So if you're Memphis, if you faced that O-line last week, they only gave up 5 and were able to dominate like that. In theory, this should be a game that they should be able to kind of ramp that up and continue to replicate that. So I guess what are the 3 keys for you just for the Memphis to pick up another win, which that would make them bowl eligible, right?
Yeah, another win would make them bowl eligible, and it would give them, assuming the bowl game, they'd have 3 games left in order to get 2 games to reach that 8-win mark that they haven't, been under since 2013. So I think this is a big game for that. And the 3 keys, I think, obviously the defense has to replicate what it did last week. Offensively, you want to get out in front. And the reason why is because if you can create a lead, then that forces ECU possibly to be one-dimensional, and you won't have to worry about that run game as much if your offense can, get up 2 touchdowns and put them in more passing situations. And so I think that's another thing. And then obviously protecting the football. You don't want to give this offense any extra possessions when they're top 25 in time of possession. So I think if they can take care of those 3 things, I think Memphis should be bowl eligible after this week.
Yeah, and it's kind of, and that's the beautiful thing about football, man. Like things can a single game can really kind of change the outlook of your season. One game at a time. But if you beat ECU, I think Tulane. I think Memphis will be a heavy favorite. as good as Houston is, I think from the AAC has kind of shown us after Cincinnati, there's not really a lot separating a lot of these teams. So, there's a chance they could reach 8 wins in the regular season, and then you have a chance to win that bowl game, win 9. And I think 3 weeks ago, we probably would have thought that was impossible. So I guess how wild is how the fortunes of the season kind of turned at the last Saturday in your mind?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, if you look after the first 3 weeks, folks were talking about if they had any chance of contending for a conference championship, then they go, lose 4 out of 5 games, and folks are wondering if they're even going to be bowl eligible. And here we are talking about 9 wins. I think if Silverfield can get 9 wins out of this season, I think you got to tip your hat off to him, because there's a few weeks ago there was no way that I saw 9 wins even being a possibility for this team, especially with the injuries that they had. I mean, Seth went down. Brandon Thomas didn't play against SMU. Drake has been out some. You've had some season-ending injuries. I mean, with all that involved, if they somehow get 9 wins out of this year, that fan base has got to be happy about that. I don't think there's any way around it. Nobody expected them to get 9 wins a few weeks ago.
All right, well, the first step is getting to number 6, beating a pretty good East Carolina team. I got to think this is one of their best teams in the last few years. So it'll be interesting. You got another early kickoff, so we'll see what the Tigers can do on the gridiron, transition into basketball. Tigers open up with a big season opening win over Tennessee Tech on Tuesday. On Saturday, they face North Carolina Central. Pretty much over the last decade, they've been one of the best HBCU basketball programs that made the tournament 4 times, won 25 games, 3 times in the last decade under their coach, Lavelle Moulton. So I'm thinking this will be a little bit more of a challenge for the Tigers, but I think it'll be another game, another opportunity for the fans to come out and see the Tigers get talented and continue to kind of rev up before the schedule gets a little bit tougher in these next few weeks.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, looking at what they were able to do in this opener, Jalen Duren, did you expect that type of defensive game out of him?
5 blocks. Yeah, 5 blocks, and more so than even the blocks was his perimeter defense. The Tigers like to switch a lot with what Penny calls their shell defense. So he spent a lot of time guarding 6-foot guard Junior Clay, who was one of the best scorers in the OVC last year and has been the last couple of years. He couldn't get past Jalen. Quickness, dribble didn't matter. He was just like a wall, and he didn't let him get past him at all. So the fact that he was so dominant so early, I mean, I think Penny wanted to see that, but I would even say he exceeded my expectation on that end, and they were already pretty high. I think, they'll face tougher teams at Tennessee Tech. He's going to have some big men that are going to test him, but he could easily be one of the best defenders, not only in the conference, but maybe in the country by the time it's all said and done.
And then defensively, the entire team, if I'm not mistaken, Tennessee Tech didn't score until almost like the 16-minute mark or something like that.
So it's interesting because the Tigers, the way they started the first and the second half, I think it had a lot of fans they were a well-oiled machine. They didn't score their first points until that 16-12 mark. The Tigers went up 11-0 or 13-0 or something like that. The second half, it was a similar story as well, too. I think the Tigers had a 10-0 run, and Tech didn't score for maybe the first 3 minutes. So when the defense was locked in, it was really good. But at the same time, in the first half, Tech was shooting around 50%. So I think they were able to break the press early. Penny kind of pointed out that he thought the team, once they got up, they kind of took their foot off the gas, which is kind of could be expected when you're facing the Tennessee Tech or somebody of that like. So when they were locked in fully, especially with the starters out there, the Tigers definitely show that they should be another elite defensive team.
So as they get to go harder competition as the season goes along, do you think those woes of kind of checking out a little bit, do you think that will go away as they face tougher competition, or are you still critical?
No, I think as the season progresses, really after North Carolina Central, honestly, they're going to start playing some really good teams with St. Louis, Western Kentucky. Those teams might not be as good as they were last year, but those are going to be teams where if you take your foot out the gas, then you're going to find yourself in a single digit lead with only about 5 or so minutes left in the game. And I don't think you want to experience this. So after this, they got St. Louis on Tuesday. Western Kentucky on the 19th. So those are going to be two teams that Memphis should probably handle. But if you have those same problems against Tennessee Tech where you get up, take your foot off the gas and let them back in the game, those teams, you're not going to be able to really pull away and go up 20 like the Tigers get against the Golden Eagles. So what you want to see on Saturday is the Tigers start fast. And if they get up double digits, you want to see them maintain that and continue to gradually build that until, the rest of the roster comes in the second half if the game is a blowout as expected.
Yeah, I think the way that this schedule is constructed, and you see this a lot of times with college basketball programs in terms of, you get some light games early in the year. I think the way this team is constructed, I think by the time they get into the meat of the schedule, I think the chemistry will be what it's supposed to be. I think people's roles will be more defined and everything. But looking at this North Carolina Central team, I'm sure it's expected to be another, blowout win. But what about this team do you think can give Memphis any type of trouble at all?
Well, let's see, North Carolina Central, just like Tennessee Tech, they're another team that has a lot of roster turnover. They only bring 3 guys back from last year. They had a COVID-19 shortened year. They brought in 10 newcomers, a bunch of transfers from kind of all over. Some guys from JUCO, some guys didn't even play last year before they ended up there. So, they played Richmond Spiders, who normally a solid team out of the Atlantic 10. They played them pretty close. They had a lead at halftime. Richmond kind of stormed back in the second half. So nothing really jumped out to me when I went through their roster. They only have 3 guys over 6'8". Only 2 are in the rotation, on Tuesday, excuse me. So that should be another game where Jalen Duren and DeAndre Williams have another big outing. All the guys they bring back are guards. So they have some experience. One of those returners was Alex Caldwell. He had a great game, 17 points, only missed 2 shots, I think 6 rebounds, 5 assists. So he's going to be the guy that I have my eye on, and he's going to draw the attention of Alex Lomax, Lester Quinones. So there's nothing really is based off the first game because there's really not much you can take from last year since they have so many new pieces. There's nothing really that jumped out to me about what Central could really do to kind of make the Tigers struggle. They didn't necessarily shoot it very well. I think it's going to be another game where Memphis is competing against itself. If you get up early once again, are you going to kind of chill and fall back and let Central kind of hang around like they did with Tech? Coach Moden is I think he's going to be a guy that eventually gets like a opportunity at a bigger job. He is very respected, one of the top coaches at that level. So he's going to have those guys ready to play. They're going to be another team. They're not going to fold. Teams are not going to fold just because Memphis comes out and gets those alley-oops and those dunks and stuff. So Memphis, I think it will be another good opportunity against a team that's tough, that's not going to lay down, for Memphis to really working on, delivering that kill shot when it's necessary, because you're going to want to do that later on in the season, especially in conference play.
Now you're looking at the money, 4-7 from 3-point. The team shot 50%. Do you think, now obviously they're not going to shoot 50% from 3 every game, but do you think that level of 3-point shooting is sustainable for this team this season?
I think so. There's no reason the Tigers shouldn't be one of the top teams in the conference in terms of three-pointers made and efficiency-wise. They have so many shooters. It starts with Imani. You have Lester. You bring a guy like Landers off the bench who hit 2 of his 3-pointers. Jaden Hardaway is a good shooter. And guys like DeAndre Williams and Josh Minot, they're not going to take a ton of threes, but I think they can knock them down when need be. And then there's guys like John Camden and Tyler Harris. So they have so many options in terms of shooters. There's a reason Penny said this is his best shooting team. And if Jalen Duren and DeAndre Williams are continuing to be so effective in the paint, it's like you got to pick your poison. And I think most teams are going to try to take away those easy twos, which is going to leave the shooters like Imani and Lester and those guys with pretty good looks. And like you said, they're probably not going to knock them down at a 50% clip every night, but if they're hovering around 40% and you're making double-digit threes a night, they're going to be really tough to beat.
Now, I'm always going to talk about how Hardaway handles this rotation, at least until we get to the meat of the season. What were your thoughts on the minute distribution in this game?
I think the biggest surprise for me was Josh Minot played a lot in the second half. I shouldn't say a lot, but he didn't really come in until maybe the end of the first half. He was a guy that I thought was going to play a lot more in the first half, but he ended up doing it in the second half. So going forward, I think he's going to be a guy that's going to continue to earn minutes. Penny said he wanted to see Chandler Lawson in action. Chandler, of course, was ruled eligible hours before tip-off by the NCAA. He only played 5 minutes or so. So they played just about everybody. I think, well, I'm looking at it right now. I want to say they played close to 13 or 14 guys. We know that number's going to get chopped down. But this will be another game where I think you'll see double-digit guys play. And he's trying to figure out the rotation still because the starters played excellent, but when the bench came in, outside of really Landers and Jaden, they didn't really keep up the same intensity, the same effectiveness, I think. I saw some stat where I think the starters were plus 20, the bench was only plus 4. So you want to see more production. You want to see more production out of Earl Timberlake, definitely. He didn't have his best outing, but, his potential is still off the roof. So I think these next 3 games, they have St. Louis, Western Kentucky after North Carolina Central. After these 4 games, I think Penny going into Brooklyn when they face Virginia Tech, he's going to have a 9-man rotation solidified, and I don't think he'll really deviate from that when they're up in Brooklyn.
Yeah, that was my last question for you is, at what point in this, you looking at this schedule, do you realistically think that Memphis may drop his first game?
Well, I mean, November 24th, they got Virginia Tech. The Hokies, I think they're ranked top 25. They're right outside of it. So that will be their first test. I think they'll definitely challenge Memphis. I'll start digging some a little bit more next week, but we know that's going to be the Landers Nolly revenge game. So that will be the first game, I think. Georgia and Ole Miss, December 1st and December 1st and December 4th. Those are both road games. That'll be the first true time that this team, I can't really call them young, but that'll be the first time guys like Imani, Jalen, and some of those other guys are playing on the road in a hostile environment. And if you're Memphis, if you do what you're supposed to, they'll go into those games as top 10 teams, which should mean a big crowd. So I would say kind of really starting in Thanksgiving, those three games, and of course you play in Xavier in the championship game and the NIT season tip-off. That's another they could drop. So those 4 games kind of starting in Thanksgiving, I think you can see the Tigers get their first blemish. But at the same time, if they get through that stretch and they're 4-0, you got Murray State, then of course you got Alabama and Tennessee. If they can make it through that 4-game stretch unblemished, I think they have a great shot at getting to conference play undefeated.
Well, starts with North Carolina Saturday first, so it should be another blowout for them.
All right, man. Thank y'all for joining us for the latest edition of the Daily Memphians Tigers podcast. We'll see y'all next week.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.